Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up every book I read during lockdown. Now I know for a lot of people lockdown was a weird and crazy time where they just couldn't read, they couldn't focus. I think that might be because I absorbed all your powers. I read 45 books in the last 3 months. That's what we're going to be wrapping up today. This is part 1. So essentially what I'm going to do is I want to tell you all of the books I read, and then I'm going to cut up the actual reviews and talking about those books into 3 parts. So we will have a contemporary and poetry video, we will have a fantasy and sci-fi video, and we'll have a miscellaneous video where I want to talk about certain books but they don't fit into those 2 key categories, because those are the 2 key genres that I have read over lockdown. Now I've been trying to read out of my comfort zone. I've obviously been doing my Top Trumps TBR, there was also the magical readathon and a bookopoly and all kinds of readathons. So if you want to know what books started in my TBRs, definitely check out those videos. In the meantime, I'm just going to run through all of the books I read and then we'll break it down. That's why this is part 1. This is in no particular order other than they are right in front of me. Like I've just got 5 stacks in front of me and I'm just going to work through each stack. So if you're looking for a review of a particular book and you're not sure if it's going to be in this video, I can't help you there. Sorry. I'm just going to start, like I said, in no particular order, not alphabetized or anything like that because I couldn't be bothered. There are too many of them. So we have Stardust by Neil Gaiman, Yes Please by Amy Powler, My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brodie Ashton and Jodie Meadows, Neil Gaiman's Coraline but as a graphic novel, Cersei by Madeleine Miller, Wilder Girls by Rory Power, A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini, This One Summer by Gillian Tamaki and Mariko Tamaki, How It Worked, The Ladybird Guide to Cats, The Ladybird Book of Dating, Animal Farm by George Orwell, DNA by Dennis Kelly. Yes, it's my teacher copy. I taught this once. Sharks, Sharks, Sharks by Tina Anton, Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, Feminine Gospels by Carol Ann Duffy, How to Care for Rabbits by Anne-Marie Berry, Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron, Star Wars Vader's Quest, Little Women by Louise May Alcott, King Henry V, God's Grave by J. Kristoff, How to Study Shakespeare, Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han, A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow, The Saga Volumes 3, 4 and 5, Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, Youngblood by Meg Cabot, Pig Heart Boy by Mallory Blackman, The Pearl in the Ice by Catherine Constable, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas and A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. Now I also listen to a whole bunch of audiobooks, so I don't have them as tangible books, but those books are A City of Ghosts by V.E. Schwab, The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky, Lady Hotspur by Tessa Grattan, Size 12 is Not Fat and Size 14 is Not Fat Either by Meg Cabot, George by Alex Gino, and Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. So yeah, it's a long old list. I put a poll out, so I wasn't sure if I was supposed to break up this long list into my 5-star ratings, 3, 4, 2 and 1 kind of thing, or if I should do it up in genre. And when I put it to a poll on Twitter, everyone suggested genre, so that is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to start with my favourite genre, which is fantasy. So I'm just going to run through my top 10 favourite fantasies that I read during lockdown. Okay, so I'm going to start with the fantasies that were okay but weren't amazing and kind of try and work my way up to some of my absolute favourites from lockdown. So we'll start with Neil Gaiman's Stardust. Now this was in my Top Trumps TBR. I kind of added it as a card because I'd had it in the bookie trials from last year. It was the Everyone Had to Read It If You Were a Scribe book, and I just didn't get around to it because I'm absolutely rubbish at readathons. You know, still had it and I wanted to read it because I owned it, and I wanted to see if everyone's criticism of Neil Gaiman's writing was kind of my opinion as well, because I know that whilst he really had his day around the same time that Terry Pratchett did, with that kind of whimsical fantasy, I know that he is not everyone's favourite fantasy writer because his writing can be quite hard to kind of break down and his stories don't really make sense all the time, and there's a lot going on because there's a lot of world building in them. But actually I do quite like that style of fantasy. I do like the kind of whimsical and weird. What was weird for me is because I didn't realise that Stardust the film was a book first, so obviously once I had the book I knew, but it was kind of going into it, I was like, oh, that's where they've taken that from, and the structure of the film versus the book is very, very different. We get a lot more backstory to a lot of the characters considering how thin the book is, but I did really enjoy that. I do enjoy Neil Gaiman's style of writing, but I can see why a lot of people got bored with this because it is very tropey, it is very paint by numbers, there isn't anything necessarily surprising or out of the blue with this, but it's a wholesome, happy read. which is strange for Neil Gaiman because that's not really his type. But I actually quite enjoyed this. It didn't blow me away, but it wasn't disappointing either. I still really enjoyed it. The next is God's Grave by J. Kristoff. Now, this is a weird one. So I did this as part audiobook, part read along, and obviously I absolutely adored Nevernight. Nevernight was one of my favourite books of the month, and it's probably one of my favourite books of the year still, because I just really enjoy J. Kristoff's style of writing, and it was a story that, although there were things that were familiar with it, it wasn't necessarily a story I'd read before. This one felt like a story that I'd read before. I didn't really feel like any of the plot points were different to the first book. It was interesting that it was gladiators as opposed to assassins, but you know she's not going to do certain things, and you know that certain people are going to do things to her and she's going to be surprised by it because it's so similar to the first book. And maybe if I'd had the same break between the both books that other people did when they were reading them when they first came out, it wouldn't have been an issue for me, but it was really an issue for me. And I could not get away from the fact that it reminded me so much of the TV series Spartacus. Add a female protagonist and it's basically the same story, like almost beat for beat, including where they're slaves and they can't get out, and how the Dominus is problematic but kind of sympathetic, and all these different elements, and the political struggles. Yeah, it was all very, very samey, and that really bothered me. And I have a real issue with second books in series anyway. I tend to get really frustrated with the second book because they almost haven't learnt the lesson from the first book. Now usually this is because in a trilogy you know that they still need to be struggling in the third book, so there's no point having them necessarily learn the lesson properly until the third book. But it means that they're not developing in the second book, and there is no personal development in this. Nothing really changes. She forgives someone from the first book that I don't think really deserves forgiveness, in a way that just doesn't make sense. It's almost like the horniness took over and she just kind of forgave them, but that's just my opinion. I get that this is a lot of people's faves, so I don't want to come down hard on it, but it bothers me. It didn't bother me enough that I won't be reading the third book. I'm hoping that by that point she'll have learned her lesson and we can finally have a resolution to stuff that was set up in the first book. I was told this one was going to break my heart. It kind of didn't, because a chapter, like, I was frustrated and I thought it was going to upset me, and then it kind of just didn't, because a chapter later everything was fixed again. I'm hoping that the last book, because I know it has really torn people's hearts, is actually going to make me feel something. This one I enjoyed, but it didn't make me feel anything, which was disappointing. But I'm going to leave it there because, yeah, like I said, I did enjoy it, but I'm just left with this bad taste in my mouth now. The next one is technically an alternative history rather than a fantasy, but I'm counting it as fantasy because you have animal shapeshifting and stuff in it. I was confused by this one. When I had it in my TBR, I actually carried it over 2 months because it took me so long to read, just because I'm a slow reader as opposed to anything else, and because I kept picking up other things that I should have been reading this and I was picking up other things. The first half of the book is the story of Lady Jane Grey and how she comes to power and how she loses her power very, very quickly. But obviously it's an alternate history, so things happen in this that don't actually happen in real life, like the fact that she turns into a ferret, which is interesting, an interesting plot device. I quite enjoyed that, but it was strange. I liked the strange, but the problem was at that point, halfway through the story, you've then got a whole other half of the story, and I just wasn't as engaged with that half of the story. I felt like her relationship with her husband was really strained. There didn't seem to be a lot of like chemistry between them. Like, I know they obviously liked each other and like loved each other, but it was very platonic, and I get that it's a YA, so you're not necessarily going to have these hyper steamy moments, but I felt like it needed some, and it just, what was there just it just fell flat for me. So I ended up not giving it the 5 stars that I thought I was going to give it. The first few chapters really held my attention. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't really like Edward's perspective, and I found him quite privileged and pretentious, which I guess is the whole point, he's a king. But I just felt like I wanted more from Gifford's and Jane's perspective, and they wasted too much time with Edward, and it just created this whole extra plot point that I just didn't really care about, so it ended up bringing it all down. But again, much like with God's Grave, I did really enjoy this. It just fell a bit flat at the end and left me with a bit of a sour taste. I'm hoping that because the other books in this series are actually later on in history, I'm not so emotionally attached to that part of history, because I really like studying the Tudors. It's one of my favourite eras because I just think so much scandalous stuff happened. It just fascinates me. That maybe because I'll care less, I'll enjoy it more, which is maybe not the best way to go into a book, but yeah, I was kind of disappointed with this one. Okay, let's talk about the ones I know you want me to talk about. So I've already mentioned them in a couple of videos before, but I obviously read these two from the Court of Thorns and Roses series. The Court of Thorns and Roses is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and the Court of Mist and Fury is not, and that is why I prefer this one so much more. I feel like there was so much character development in this one. This one is exciting and fun. What I really liked about it is the fact that the Beauty and Beast element is dropped halfway through, and unlike with My Lady Jane, where the second half doesn't necessarily make sense with the first half, it really does. The first half you build up to this relationship, which I was massively skeptical of because there were so many red flags. I don't know if it's because obviously I'm going into this series so much later than everyone else, so I kind of see people talking about Rhysand and understand that Tamlin is not going to be the one, but I was not for Tamlin straight away. So the fact that she was fighting so hard for him made me really appreciate Farah, because actually she's literally fighting for her life, but she's fighting for his as well. And I like a female protagonist who isn't afraid to actually step up and use her brain and use her strength and kind of kick ass. Like, I know that that's not the epitome of what a strong female character is, but it is a type of female character that I really enjoy. Passionate, and not just in her like fighting style and hunting, but in her love life, and she cares about her family. Everything she does with great passion, and I really appreciated that. So I really did like her setup, and then to see her kind of break down and build back up in the second one with someone who is also broken and building himself back up was really beautiful. And because I enjoyed their story, their love story so much, I cannot bring myself to read the third one. Not because I think, like, I know they're going to get together eventually, but just because this to me was just the perfect duology. I didn't need the final scene where Tamlin rocks up. Other than that, like, this was just so perfect that I'm really hesitant to read the next books. Also, I really want a Nesta and Cassian spin-off, and I know that that's what everyone's saying the next book is going to be about, but considering they thought the last one that came out was going to be that, I don't know. So I'm going to wait for everyone else to kind of say, yes it is, because I know I'm not going to get that in the third book, and I really wanted that in the third book, because I thought, well, their relationship's set now, let's move on to someone else, and that's not what happens. So I just can't quite bring my head to like do it yet. But I will finish this series eventually, because I'm not a quitter, but I'm pacing myself. Let me just enjoy this as a duology for now, but I did really enjoy this. I scored Court of Thorns and Roses 4 stars, and I scored A Court of Mist and Fury with 5 stars. I thought it was epic. I really enjoyed it. The battle scenes, the sex scenes, the sad scenes, all of it was epic. I loved it. So a debut that I ordered and didn't remember ordering was A Song Below Water. This is a story about two girls who are dealing with the fact that one of them is a siren, and sirens are a metaphor for Black Lives Matter, and the fact that they feel illegal in some places, they are cast down, they are beaten up, they're treated as other, all these really like dark, sad things that people everywhere are dealing with all of the time, and we need to be more aware of that. There is also a hidden mystery creature that I don't want to spoil for you, that one of them has to kind of deal with, that she doesn't realise that she is this thing that is also related to kind of being a siren, but she isn't a siren, and it's discovering who you are and how society is going to respond to that. And it has some really poignant, beautiful moments, but it isn't a black trauma book, I think is the phrase. I can't remember what it's called. I know on Twitter lots of people have been calling out for books that are written by black authors but aren't focused on black trauma or anything like that. This is that, although it has elements of that in it because culturally it's relevant. It is a story of two young girls trying to find out who they are and where they fit within society. It has some really sad moments, it has some really cool, powerful moments. It is a really short read, like it's not a particularly thick book, but I cannot wait to see what else Bethany C. Morrow creates, because I'm just going to lap it up. I absolutely love this, and I gave it 5 stars, but I can't go into any more detail than that without giving spoilers, because it's so short and so much happens in it that I'm just going to end up giving it away. So go out and get this if you haven't already. It's stunning, and I just love the front cover because it's all bright yellow, and yellow is one of my favourite colours, so that is just a bonus. The only middle grade on my list is The Pearl in the Ice. This is another siren / mermaid story where a young girl she follows her father to the North Pole, where he is doing some secret mission that she's not supposed to know about, and she lives on his boat, and she's not supposed to be there, and she helps raise the dogs on the boat, and she discovers that part of her heritage is being a mermaid and what that means. And it's kind of It is comparable to Harry Potter in discovering this second world and the second half of herself that she knows nothing about, and obviously the age bracket is in the same thing, so the writing style is very, very similar, but obviously she's not going to like a magic school or anything like that. She's very, very isolated. She has her friends, but they're not her friends because they're so much older than her. The dynamic doesn't work because she's so much younger than them. So she is very much on her own, but she's a very strong and independent character. But it means that she relies on the wrong people, and that then causes big problems. But it's really, really beautiful. It does look at abandonment and isolation and things like that, but it's a really, really pretty story. This is one of the books that I bought from my buy a book from every independent shop in Kent trip, and I bought it because I asked them if they had any books written by local authors, and Catherine Constable is based, I think, either in Canterbury or Faversham, so not far from me. So although this isn't set in this area, there is something very familiar about this. A lot of it is in Portsmouth or the North Pole. I've not been to the North Pole, but I have been to Portsmouth, so that helped. But you can just imagine it in this world, and it's all set during World War II, so they're trying to find like ways of beating the other side. It's really it's quite complicated, but the story takes you through it because it's middle grade. You're not going to get lost in it, but I thought it was really, really good, and if you'd like a little middle grade to do with mermaids, I would definitely recommend this one. Now I want to talk about Wilder Girls, because Wilder Girls is, I still don't know how I feel about this one. So I read it around the same time that Charlotte at Beige Pages did, and she hated the ending, and it really made her hate the rest of the book because it is so convoluted of a story. And what made it worse is then afterwards I was trying to find why Rory Power gave this the ending she did, and she wrote in an interview that, or it was written in an interview, that she wrote down what she knew, and that's all that she knew about the story, and after that, that's why it ended the way it did, and that made it worse. So every time I found out more information about this, the lower the rating I wanted to give it. Charlotte gave this 2 stars, I think. I gave it 5 stars initially because it just left me feeling so beaten emotionally, and for me, so rating 5 stars, it's a case of like, am I going to be talking to people about this forever? Yes. Did I hate the ending? Yes. So that kind of lost it a star. Because it gets to the point where you're like, okay, everything feels resolved and yet there's still 10 pages, and then there's more conflict and you're like, well then it's not resolved, and then it just ends. It has the most frustrating cliffhanger ever. Now I did really like the writing style. I didn't mind the split perspectives. The narrative, the structure of the narrative was quite strange because the structure of the narrative was quite strange because you weren't sure who was ahead of whom. So obviously when the 2 girls split, they start having different timelines and you're not really sure how that works. That was really strange. The actual idea of the pox was really interesting. It was not a great idea to read about a pandemic during a pandemic. Not my smartest move ever, but I did finish this towards the end of lockdown, so I guess that's some kind of reprieve. Anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed it until the end. If I could just take back those last 3 chapters, we'd be fine, but I can't. So she's got Rory Power has another book coming out, or is out, calling Burning All the Bodies, or Burn the Bodies Down, or something like that, and I'm really reluctant to give it a go because if she does the same thing with that book that she did with this, she's going to quickly become my least favourite author. If you're looking for something that's a bit Lost Boys or Lord of the Flies, but for girls and very feminist, then this is it. If you're looking for something that's going to give you a satisfying ending, this ain't it. And we'll leave that there. Every Heart a Doorway is probably the shortest fantasy that I have. I really wasn't expecting this to be so skinny considering how much is in it. It's a really interesting story. It's a murder mystery, but it's all about kids who have come back from the other side of a door. Whether it's a wonderland place or just another place, they've all kind of fallen into these very, very literary, beautiful places for them that suit them perfectly. They've had to return for whatever reason, or they've been forced back, and they desperately want to go to this other place again because that's where they consider home. So they all kind of congregate in this school, and they're all looked after, and they have therapy together to kind of deal with the fact that they live in the normal world now and people do not understand them. Really, really clever, really, really beautifully written, not long enough. I'm so glad there's more books in this series because there was just so much more that I wanted to know. Of course my favourite character died almost immediately, which is always the way. I don't know how I do it. I always manage to pick the character that dies first as my favourite. I'm like, oh my god, oh no. Every time. Really, really enjoyed it. I can see why so many people rate this. Yeah, great. Next we have Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This was a strange one. I gave it 4 stars in the end There was a lot of murder mystery, and I couldn't help but compare this to Crescent City the whole time I was reading it, and preferring this to Crescent City. Crescent City has romance elements and is a lot more romance and fantasy than it is a murder mystery. This is a lot more murder mystery than it is a fantasy. It has fantasy elements in it, but fundamentally it is driven by her trying to work out, like Alex Stern, the main character, trying to work out her past and trying to work out who has killed someone on this campus. It has secret societies and occult themes and magic and all this really dark stuff, and it is so beautifully handled. Like, I really, really enjoyed it. I think the only thing that kind of didn't give it that 5 stars for me is it ticked a lot of boxes, but it didn't necessarily do anything wholly original for me. But I did really like it, and as an introduction to Leigh Bardugo's style of writing, I'm here for it. I've got the Shadow of Bone series to read, and I know that everyone has absolutely loved that. So it'll be really interesting to see her YA versus her adult content. I thought it was great. I don't really know what else to say. I know that it's quite a few people's favourite book. This is definitely one that I would recommend. If you're looking for a book for undead characters, LGBTQ, I'm trying to think what other prompts for Gothtober it would fit. There's quite a few prompts. The Dark Academia, this kind of ticks off those boxes. So yeah, definitely highly recommend. If you're taking part in Gothtober and you need a read, this is definitely one I would put down. And if you know any other murder mysteries that kind of have this fantasy element that kind of remind you of Ninth House, please let me know what they are, because I need more of these in my life. And then the very, very last book in my fantasy collection for my lockdown wrap-up is Cersei by Madeleine Miller. I'm terrible at being like, it's my favourite, but it's definitely in the top 5. This is by far in the top 5 of my favourite books that I read during lockdown. It was absolutely beautiful. Now, I really enjoyed The Song of Achilles, which I read that a couple of years ago for my uni course. And that is about soft boys who fall in love and go to war. This one is about feminine independence. It's about stepping out from your family's shadow. It's about having control of your own life and understanding that you can't control everything and you shouldn't have to feel responsibility for everything, but also with magic and her being a witch and Greek mythology, and it's so good. I just loved it. I thought the pacing of it was absolutely stunning. The writing is really simple, because I find that sometimes with Greek myths, some people that try to write historical fiction really lean into the language of it, whereas this is very, very simple. It feels very contemporary. She's talking to you about her life. She has modern problems, but it's set in a Greek era. It's powerful. There is obviously trigger warnings for a rape scene in the middle of it, which I kind of knew about going in, but wasn't prepared for just how emotionally wrought it was going to be. So that's something to look out for. It's quite a short read, and I devoured it in a weekend. I just thought this was absolutely incredible, absolutely epic, and would definitely recommend. If you need an intro to Greek mythology and you're not entirely sure, I would definitely recommend this, because there are so many gods in this that she talks about as her family because she's part of them, but she's not part of them. And it will kind of give you an in, even if you've got no other context for Greek mythology, which is unlikely, but if you have no other context for Greek mythology, this would be a fantastic place to start. So highly, highly rated. I gave that 5 stars. Loved it. And that's it. That's my fantasy wrap up and part 1 of my lockdown wrap up. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, if you could comment below with any books that you think are similar to Ninth House, so I can add them to my TBR, because I really, really enjoyed it and I want more like that, and any other Greek myths that you think are very similar to Cersei, because again, I need those in my life. But other than that, I hope you're having a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!